Lisa McCarricker, and welcome to BioTrek Selling. Well, we were all thankful when 2020 ended. But really, didn't we know that COVID was going to continue during 2021?
It is mid-February. The infection rates are finally going down after a New Year's peak. The emergency rooms are still full in many parts of the world, and the worldwide rates of COVID remain high. We still have Zoom cocktails, we wear masks, and many are just staying home. What are the predictions for cruising sailors in 2021, 2022, and beyond? It looks like 2021 will be similar to 2020 in terms of COVID outbreaks, travel restrictions, and border closures. Is it wise to plan around the world right now? We're going to talk about that. When COVID hit, we had just had the bottom painted in Saint Martin, and Pierre and I discussed the potential severity of the situation. We decided to leave Saint Martin immediately and head towards Bahamas, and we stopped briefly in Puerto Rico along the way.
Tuesday, March 17th. The sun has just come up, so here we are, just alongside Long Island with our destination to go into Georgetown, Bahamas. We've come a long way from the sunny side of Puerto Rico.
We arrived in Georgetown the day before Bahamas closed its borders, and then headed to an anchorage in Long Island where we waited out the beginning of the lockdowns.
Sunset, March 26th, day 6. Some boats have left, others have arrived.
As things got worse, we decided to head to our home in Boston to finalize the steps we had planned for the summer to complete our transition to living aboard full-time and to make sure we would not be caught in the tropics during hurricane season. Cruising sailors are some of the only people who've been able to travel somewhat normally during COVID. Yet, Pierre and I know some of the horror stories of sailors caught in lockdowns. Some who went home on the wrong time and couldn't get back to their boats. Boats stuck in hurricane zone as countries closed their borders. Some not permitted to leave a country. People who got sick in a foreign land. And some who did not survive.
What can we predict for cruising sailors in 2021, 2022, going forward to 2023? Is world cruising feasible? Should we be thinking about it?
To predict the future, it's helpful to look back to see how quickly things happened between mid-March and mid-April 2020. As we sailed up the coast of Florida, cruise ships were all anchored, not allowed in port, and passengers were stuck on board. But look at the airline industry. It plummeted rapidly. Another interesting trend is that it is starting to come back. As shown by this comparison of commercial flights in 2020 shown in red and 2019 shown in purple. This analysis of the impact of COVID on air cargo, expressed as a % change in cargo ton kilometers, shows the impact on the global economy and how supply chains were affected. While food production was not severely impacted, there was panic buying resulting in empty shelves and unavailability of essential items, such as toilet paper. And aside from mask wearing and airplane travel, there have been other social changes, such as travelers not welcome, even in places where they own property. We've learned a lot in the last 11 months, including the impact of air pollution on our health and our ability to fight COVID. This graph shows particulate air pollution over the United States, and superimposed the number of COVID deaths per million. Looking at the future, one thing is clear. There are many unknowns. COVID likes to mutate. With reduced efficacy of vaccines with some of the new mutations, it makes the future very difficult to predict. There are long-term effects on society, and some of them are likely to last, such as social distancing, mask wearing, being cautious with outsiders, and not shaking hands anymore, the elbow bump. And if you've had COVID, there could be possible long-lasting effects on respiratory function, and some of the symptoms continue over many months. These are called the long haulers, something that's not well understood. So we've reflected on whether it's still wise to sail during COVID, and concluded that it is. Cruisers carry their home with them, so it's one of the safest ways to travel, as long as you don't need to jump in an airplane and travel home too often. Air is clean on the water compared to cities. We are predicting resurgences in infection, and so the countries that have had very travel restrictive responses are likely to react similarly in the future, and we need to take that into account. The total incidence of COVID in 5 years will depend crucially on the duration of immunity, which is not known. And 16% of the world's population have access to 60% of the vaccine supply. So it's going to take a long time before the world is vaccinated. We know that social distancing and masks are likely to be maintained well into 2022. And tourists generally feel safer when traveling short distances from home, so we might expect to have fewer visits from friends and family if we're far away, but we also might expect to have some of those remote locations all to ourselves. We've been thinking about best practices for sailors during times of COVID. We're certainly going to get vaccinated before we go off sailing this spring. And also to keep plenty of food on board, because if there is a resurgence in the pandemic, it can affect supply chains. We'll be extra cautious when having crew and guests on board to make sure people are COVID tested and quarantine if needed to ensure disease-free ocean passages. And it's important to know where the testing sites will be at destination, because some countries are now requiring that to get in. We keep up to date on the requirements to get into new countries, but border closures can happen while en route, so we need to be extra vigilant. One of the pleasures of cruising is dining out. And to be safe, sailors, we know which way the wind is blowing. Stay upwind. In some ways, cruising sailors are infinitely better prepared for pandemic lockdowns and quarantines than regular folks who live at home are. But we still need to be very careful. Medical support outside our home country would be much less predictable. And vaccines are not 100% effective, and may be less so with new variants. And it's important to remember that 1/3 of infected people have absolutely no symptoms, so that could be the person that you invited to dinner. And some people have lower safety preferences, so remain true to your own safety preferences, because you can't predict the clinical severity of COVID in advance. And it is possible to get COVID more than once, especially with the new variants. So if you've already had it, it doesn't mean you're home free.
So what will the future bring? Is it going to be a new normal for cruising sailors and just regular testing to get into countries and we're all used to it? Is the pandemic going to go away? Or are we going to have spikes and border closures? We can't predict the future, but what we can do is be better prepared. Many thanks to the YouTube sailing stations who've posted their experiences during COVID around the world. That's really helped us predict what to expect if other spikes occur in 2021, 2022, even 2023. I'd like to give a shout out to all our subscribers and followers. Your support has been fabulous while we've been overwintering in Boston unexpectedly.